Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Bryan. I'm one of the pastors here, and we're in the midst of a series called Why I Follow Jesus. And a few of us have been taking an opportunity just to share a little bit of our stories of what has led us to the point where we're following or still following Jesus. And so this morning, I have an opportunity to share a little bit of my story with you. And then in a moment, or it'll be more in a moment, believe me. In a little while, I'll call Deb Frew to join me on stage, and she's going to share a little bit of her story as well. I thought I'd start out with a picture of a diamond. This is not any ordinary diamond. This is the centenary diamond, which has been discovered. It was discovered and cut and displayed in South Africa. It is a 273 carat diamond. And one of the fascinating things, I tried to get it for my engagement ring, but just couldn't quite pull it off. But one of the things that is particularly stands out about this is it is known for its numerous facets, which is the sides or the flat spaces in that diamond. There are 247 facets in all in that diamond. So a pretty incredible specimen, I would say. Now, in some ways, I think Jesus is like this multifaceted diamond, in that it takes a lifetime more to ponder and experience every facet of who Jesus is. There's many brilliant facets. And I've come to think of following Jesus as coming to see more clearly who Jesus really is, being more and more captivated by his way, and then with the help of the Spirit of Jesus, just becoming more like him and kind of better able to reflect the brilliance and the beauty of who Jesus is. And as we saw in that opener and sung a little bit, when Jesus talked to people who were expressing maybe an interest in coming to follow him, he said oftentimes in the Gospels, first, well, come and see, and then come and follow. So just as I share for some time today, I wanted to share a little bit of what I've come to see and how I've come to follow Jesus throughout and discover in the process some fascinating and captivating facets of Jesus. I'm going to kind of break it down in chronologically to some extent. So for the first 2 decades of my life, I grew up in a Christian home. We went to a pretty conservative church 2 or 3 times a week. Did the whole Sunday school thing and youth group when I was a teenager. And I would say during that time, I focused on the feature was 3 facets of Jesus. One, I came to understand or see that Jesus was a newborn baby, right? So, Christmas was a thing, and it still was, and that was fun to celebrate as a kid. But I also understood that God cared enough about humans to send God's Son to live among us. So that story, I got it, and I kind of like the idea that God cared about us enough. And then came to recognize as well Jesus as a savior who died. In my upbringing. So the idea that Jesus came and died on the cross to save us from our sins and so that we could have forgiveness and life with God. And believing this really was the key element of what it meant to be a follower of Jesus. And so I can remember back when I was 4 or 5 years old, I went to this backyard Bible club and prayed a prayer to ask Jesus into my heart. And I kind of ran back home, and that was an exciting thing. And I think, like Ruth said last week, there were several times in my childhood that I did the same thing just to be sure I got it right, because that was a really important deal. And so that was another facet that I was had discovering or was presented to me about Jesus. And then in our congregation, my denomination, there was also this element, a facet of Jesus as coming king. And so we were to wait expectantly for Jesus to return at any time and just kind of be ready for that. Now that did a few things. First of all, I was I played a lot of baseball as a kid. And so I can remember probably when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, a few times. I got down on my knees in my bedroom, and it was, filled with posters of baseball and baseball themed wallpaper. And I could remember praying because I knew this was something that I should pray about and be excited about. So I said, God, would you please send Jesus soon? But maybe first let me have a chance to make it to the majors. So I was, there was a little tension, like this is a really good thing, but I'd like to live life a little bit. Spoiler alert, I didn't make it to the majors. So just in case you were wondering, we'll leave it there. I assume that's not any cause for delay. I probably should think about that a little bit. But so what I didn't really talk about was following Jesus that much. It was really believing in Jesus. And I believed in this Jesus. I mean, the stories kind of made sense. Everybody in my family, it seemed to work for them and work for my church. And so this is something that I didn't have a lot of questions about, not a lot of doubts as a kid and even into my high school years. And so, yeah, I believe in this Jesus. And I'm willing. I was baptized as a teenager. And so it seemed to work. But in terms of like following something or following someone, it seemed that, kind of looking back, that Jesus had the beginning of that faith journey covered and had the end of that faith journey covered. But we seem to look elsewhere for what to do, like here in the middle, like when we were actually living. How do we live? And so there were a few things, I think, that came down in my tradition and what I would say was growing up is what it really meant to be a Christian and how to follow God in our day. And it was, I think, really come to read and obey the Bible. And there were especially, like Moses' 10 Commandments and Paul's letters. And for me, later, the Proverbs just seemed to like be really practical. And so try to follow them. Listen to Christian music, don't date non-Christians, be willing to be a missionary, and vote Republican. And I think if you could do all of those things, that was pretty much part of the package deal, right? And so as I went through my youth and grew up, that was what it really meant to be a follower of God. And those were three foundational facets of my journey that I had begun to try to understand or see about Jesus. In the second 20 years of my life, I went to college, seminary, got married, started pastoral ministry, began a family, but I also developed a kind of a expanding understanding of who Jesus was. I was exposed to different traditions who came at things from a different way, probably in their tradition grew up looking at different facets of Jesus. And so through that began to see a little bit more. And I would say during that era of my life, there were some more facets revealed or uncovered to me. One was that Jesus is a constant companion. I would say that I'm not a person that can point to this really spectacular mystical experience where I really sense God present in a very spectacular way. But I would say that for the most part, I've had kind of a low-key interactive relationship with God. I've sensed God is with me. God communicates through scriptures and in my thoughts. And so that really was introduced to me more frequent, or I guess more powerfully during those years as I was growing and experiencing that a little bit more regularly. Now, I'd say I'd been probably a fairly lousy conversation partner throughout those years because I could go into lulls where I'm just distracted and too busy with life, too busy with ministry to pay a whole lot of attention to that relationship. And yet still it was during those years that foundation was laid, that I became aware that kind of connection and relationship with God was available. And just opening up another facet of who Jesus was. And then I would say I came to understand as Jesus as one who makes or invites disciples. About I think it was 1998. I was, still learning, still growing as a young pastor, and read a book by Dallas Willard called The Divine Conspiracy. And in it, there's plenty of materials and quotes that are in there. But he said this: if I am Jesus' disciple, that means I am with him to learn from him how to be like him. And so I think that actually that whole book and some others around it and conversations I was having was kind of whetting my appetite for trying to get a sense of what it really means to follow Jesus in the day in and day out of life. What does it mean to learn to become like him and to grow in that throughout? And how can I put in, as I was exposed more to the teachings of Jesus, how can I put that into practice in my life and just be growing in that way? And then I would say finally, for that era, I'm sure it's not finally, there were other things, but things that came to mind is the kind of Jesus as the head or the leader of the church. You know, my life kind of revolved around church during those times. And so we were constantly thinking like, how would God want us to lead this church and operate this church, if you will? And during that time, we often looked to the New Testament for sure, but maybe like Paul's letters or the book of Acts to see what that should look like. But still, I found the Gospels to be confusing. You know, other than Christmas and Easter, there's like the stuff in the middle was I just couldn't wrestle with. So we didn't spend a whole lot of time with it. But then also as we kind of, you know, went through life in the church, also noticed that, you know, there had been a lot of things over the centuries, really, that had been added on to, and maybe in some ways tarnished the glow on the diamond, if you will, and made some of those facets of who Jesus was a little bit harder to understand. And so I was trying to, you know, experience just there was something maybe missing about life as a church. There was something too that I was missing in my experience with God, and you know, I had ran, you know, prayers running a little bit dry. I kind of felt that I ran out of things to teach a congregation authentically, and so there was a period where I was, you know, a little bit of a lull and a standstill, and trying to think, just thinking, there's got to be something more. There's got to be something better. Now, I want to just for a moment shift metaphors on you here, because personality-wise, I'm a guy who kind of likes to have my ducks in a row, at least mentally or theologically. And so I would say for those first almost 40 years, I had gotten to the point where I was rearranging all my theological ducks, and they pretty well lined up, you know, pretty well. Like they were being kind of obedient and compliant and all kind of in a row. And I was feeling pretty good about that. You know, some of those misgivings, and it's not maybe all that it could be, but I think I've got it figured out. I think I got church pretty well figured out, and you know, God, yeah, pretty followed out. And Jesus, I'm a little not sure about that, but I think I know what I need, right? I should be good. And then there were, I would say, two of those ducks that started to get a little bit ornery. And they started to kick and stir up some trouble for me. And the result was, as you would say, it got a little chaotic because there were a couple of things. First of all, on my, I mentioned a little bit, some of a fascination when I was in my teens, kind of a fascination with how can my faith mix with politics, right? So there was that kind of the package that I had grown up with and kind of stirring around with that a little bit. That was just kind of the way things were in my culture. But as I was kind of going through that similar process, I commuted a short distance to work, and I would be listening to quite conservative talk radio. And it was a time where there was presidential elections, and it was got pretty heated in terms of opposition. Barack Obama was running at the time, and then started in, and I just started to feel very uneasy about hearing from the same source, you know, talk about Jesus, what it means to live by faith, but also a real just contempt for the other side, and kind of a mean-spirited discussion or diatribes that just to me seem to be inconsistent with like the fruit of the spirit that we read about, you know, love and joy and peace. Where is that in this whole dialogue? And so I just got to be really frustrated by that or almost repulsed and say, that just doesn't seem right. There's got to be a different way that we follow Jesus, even if we try to engage in that political scene. And then also, right around the same time, we had a long time kind of a spiritual mentoring relationship that kind of took an unhealthy turn. When we found out that it was very clear that there was really no room for questions or doubts or different ideas, and kind of just created some pretty significant stress for us. And so after kind of wrestling through that, I just decided to kind of kick those ducks out of the pond, maybe gently remove them. So I just turned off the radio, stopped listening to that. And we decided we had to leave that particular church we were at, kind of leaving behind the denomination that I had grown up in. And that's when we started coming to Cedar Ridge. And so as those couple of ducks got kicked out of the water or out of the pond, the rest of the ducks kind of freaked out, as you say. So what's happening here, right? What's going on? And that kind of led into, what had been a fairly orderly upbringing with the ducks all in a row. It went into a period of, Matthew talked about, order, period of disorder. Period of disorientation, kind of a period of confusion where my mind was muddled. And I think one of the main questions that I had come up with, or that was pressing me, is how is it that my brand of Christianity that I had grown up seems to be producing people of us maybe who are partisan and mean-spirited or exclusive and just kind of rigid. And I just was growing uncomfortable with that. And if there were inklings of that in me, I just wasn't sure that was the way we needed to go. And I was experiencing along top of that something's missing in my own life. So I just said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. So we end up coming to Cedar Ridge, and really for the last, say, 15 years almost, it's been a period of reordering. Disorder in there for sure, and reordering as well. There's been a time where it's been fairly, just mentally turbulent, I would say. At times just kind of a brain fog as different issues come up and different ideas that I've been intrigued by that certainly wouldn't have been ideas that would have been welcomed in the past. Questions that I didn't really realize I had kind of came to the surface, and it was really a kind of the idea of taking another look at the diamond and trying to that one that I had inherited, and just continue to discover, right, what's real here, maybe what's been tarnished a bit, and maybe somebody threw in a little cubic zirconia on a piece of that diamond that just wasn't really intended to be there, and in a sense was a fake, and was maybe just causing some misunderstanding on my part. And so as I was growing here, I was able to start to get out of the fog by starting to look more closely at the person of Jesus, the Jesus we find in the Gospels, and becoming aware of some facets that I hadn't seen before. And it was turned into, I would say, what was probably a Bible-centered faith to more of a Jesus-centered faith. And so through being here with you and some personal study, I began to discover that really as I kind of turned the diamond around, there are some other facets that show more of the brilliance and the beauty of Jesus that had been blind spots in the past. I didn't realize that these were parts of the same diamond. And I just became more captivated by the person of Jesus. And it was, again, kind of looking at that middle part of the Gospels that I was, not so comfortable with before. And I was begin to pay attention not only to the teachings of Jesus, but also just to see Jesus interacting, as it's recorded there, with different people of different kinds. And it began to shed a light and open my eyes to some different ways of seeing who Jesus really is. And so during this past phase, I would say there's several facets that have come to light for me. And one is seeing Jesus as teacher. Getting acquainted with the Sermon on the Mount and some of the other teachings of Jesus, it really has showed me the unmatched insight Jesus has into how things really are. calling us to live a life of love and showing us a better way to do life, a better way to do, religion, relationships, conflict, prayer, economics, probably even politics. There was a better way that Jesus wanted to show us. And I've just become more and more convinced that really if more of us and more of the world embraced the way of Jesus and even the teachings and the spirit of Jesus, this world would be a much better place. So that's part of what has captivated me, by seeing that side, that facet of Jesus. Another one is Jesus as a compassionate includer. Time and time again, as you know, we see Jesus interacting with those who had been left out in the culture, whether it's children, women, the tax collectors who were the traitors of the time, the sinners as they were labeled, those who were condemned by the religious establishment, soldiers, you name it. Jesus was willing to interact with them and welcome them, invite them into God's family. And so that was, again, kind of a new take. And I've been challenged by that, inspired by that. It was during this time, Sue and I kind of decided to adopt a couple of teens from traumatic background and some disabilities into our lives, as I think in part compelled by that aspect of Jesus, and certainly has been an opportunity for growth, and it's been a challenge, and it's been messy. And that idea of following Jesus in those ways can be hard and can be challenging. But also, and then just seeing, having opportunities here to interact with people in Guatemala, and opening my eyes to some different ways that compassion and including folks is something that I'm trying and learning how to follow Jesus in this fresh way. And then there's also this seeing Jesus as a prophetic reformer. This is a passage we read a lot here about Jesus went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. So I think, I could be wrong here, but I think I think here is probably the first time I really paid attention to that passage of scripture. I knew I never taught it or preached it, because I wasn't sure exactly what to do with it, because it didn't fit the facets that we focused on in my tradition. It's kind of like, we're supposed to avoid that, just worry about getting the saved part down, and we'll leave the helping people and injustices to other folks. But that had been a blind spot, and my eyes had been opened to some new things, that as I thought through the implications of who Jesus is and who he was being pictured as in the Gospels, my eyes opened to injustices that I had been unaware of before, hunger and poverty, issues that we really should be concerned about. And also to kind of move towards the courage of echoing Jesus' prophetic voice to people of faith, and also to society at large. And so another book that I read early on was by Jim Wallace, and he had this quote that helped me kind of make some sense of my past and present and how all this might fit together. But he wrote these words: "God is not partisan. God is not a Republican or a Democrat. The best contribution of religion is precisely not to be ideologically predictable nor loyally partisan. Both parties in the nation must let the prophetic voice of religion be heard." And so that was at least a thought to say, okay, maybe there is another way. Maybe there is a better way that we can follow after Jesus and still be engaged in the world around us in a way that is consistent. Well, I could go on and on, but I won't. But other than to say, there's Some other facets that I have been seeing. One, I think of Jesus as a spiritual presence, who we can become aware of through contemplative practices that frankly weirded me out at first when I first started doing that, Jesus as an uncontrolling partner, who isn't micromanaging the world, but invites and stirs people to be his partners in doing good. And Jesus as a nonviolent peacemaker who calls us to forgive, calls us to enemy love, and gives us a different lens through which we might view some of the disturbing images of God that we see in the Old Testament. So why do I follow Jesus? I think, simply put, I would say I follow Jesus because I'm captivated by him. It's been this process of being, he keeps surprising me with different facets of who he is, different ways of seeing him and understanding who he is. And he keeps, in a sense, revealing these different elements to me that continues to draw me in, continues to captivate me, and stirs a desire in me to be with him and to be more like him. So that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me following, as inconsistently as that may be. It's what keeps me looking forward. Now, so again, I see it this lifetime journey that helps us see more clearly who Jesus is. There's a few questions that I kind of use as try to think through, and I need to remind myself of through this journey, and maybe these would help you as I wrap up. And one would be, how would we evaluate the facets of Jesus that were presented to us in our earliest Christian experience? What ones maybe need to be polished a bit to remove some of the tarnish? What ones might look real but are actually fakes that maybe with good intentions just got put in place, and we need to carefully remove them from the authentic one? What ones are impacted by a defective lens or a steamed up lens in which we were looking? And then what ones need to be embraced and enjoyed and celebrated for the foundation they gave us? So that's just one question. Another would, how can we, this is one that's important for me, how can we make sure we go beyond an intellectual investigation of Jesus to a living experience with him? And so, part of my temptation is, right, I want my ducks in a row, so I want my Jesus ducks in a row. And I figure if I study enough, I can get it all figured out, and I got Jesus down. But that has been helped, I think, by learning some more meditative reading of Scripture that just allows some contemplative stillness and silence, just to allow the reality of Jesus to kind of touch my heart, stir my heart, other than just, massage my head. And then a third question, what facet of Jesus are we most captivated by right now? I shared with you kind of some of mine, but maybe that's the question, like, what is it that really captivates you about who Jesus is? And then celebrate that and keep digging, keep exploring. And then how will we remain open to discovering more facets of Jesus in the future? I think there are always going to be facets that we come to discover. That seems to be true of the disciples, the earliest disciples who followed Jesus. Jesus said, come and see. And then gradually they came to, their eyes were more and more open to see who Jesus was. And I think that same can be true for us. Paul, the apostle and writer of 1 Corinthians, most likely said, put it this way: for at the moment, all that we can see are puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then face to face. I know in part for now, but then I'll know completely, through and through, even as I am completely known. So maybe it really does last beyond a lifetime when we continue to see, or how we continue to see Jesus more clearly. So if I'm going to continue following Jesus, I need to keep looking to Jesus, to center on him, to immerse myself in his way. Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews, put it this way: let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, who is the author of our faith and the one who brings it to its goal. Well, that's my story. I'm sticking with it. But now I want to invite Deb to come up and join me on stage. Why don't you just welcome her with a round of applause? Deb. Deb and I have had a chance to get to know each other primarily through our role together on the Guatemala team. By the way, if you have any questions about what's going on with that or about our recent trip this summer to Guatemala, feel free to ask Deb or me. Love to talk about it. But Deb, for those of us who don't know you, why don't you just tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Okay. Deb Frew, Deborah, Debbie. I go by a lot of names, you'll see. I've been coming here since 2002. I brought my kids here to give them a Christian education and to make sure they followed in my path of getting a Christian education, which I can move into that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I know we've talked about how I've seen in you just a lot of growth and a willingness and a commitment to pay attention to what God is doing in you, and I've been impressed by that and by the changes that you've experienced, I've seen, and the growth that you've been committed to, even when it's been difficult. So that's really in part why I wanted to bring you up. And then I also noted, and just as a little explainer for the morning, you like to show your creativity, right? Whether it's music or and today we're going to see some little 5-minute sketches that you've done in journals throughout this process that maybe will help tell a story beyond the words. So that you're going to see on the screen some of those that kind of jive with a little bit. But yeah, you started out as a kid. Started as a kid. Well, as many of us did.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about that childhood experience.
Well, I probably heard Jesus love me in the womb. My family was very church going, and I have the pins to prove it. I have every pin from probably 4 years old through 13th year, and then that's 15 years of never missing Sunday school.
Wow. Let's hear it for Deb. Yeah.
15 years of never missing Sunday school. Ever. My father, if I traveled, he would take me to church and write a note so I could take it back to church and say, I went to Sunday school. So that is half of my upbringing, with my father being very entrenched. I remember him getting up real early in the morning to study for Sunday school lessons, and he was very, very dedicated. The other half, of course, there's good and bad. I had a lot of dysfunction in my family coming up, a lot of unpredictability. Day to day, I just didn't know what to anticipate, which caused me to have a fear of abandonment, they call it. So growing up with judging, advice, blaming, bitterness, resentment, never getting through an issue, really caused me to start hiding myself, not feeling good enough. I couldn't do it right. It was people pleasing to save connection in relationships, which turned into fear, worry, doubt that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and control issues because I felt out of control. So of course it puts you into control mode. So, I study what fear of abandonment means, and somehow in my upbringing, something was lacking, whether it was a physical care or an emotional care. So I know that now, but at the time I was not happy. I decided to search elsewhere to what was given to me. And those miserable days made me decide I was going to do something different in my life. So I continued to search and went on with my life thinking this is the way life is for everybody. And but I wanted something different, and I wanted no conflict. I'm a peaceful person, I didn't like that conflict. It really shut me down. So I just went on a search for this love that I kept hearing about. My whole life I hear about it, but I wasn't feeling too whole like I was supposed to be feeling. So as most people, I think I went off looking, and I met my beautiful husband. We married, and we had a family, and we raised them to the best of our ability. We are very grateful at this point in time for them. But I have to say that looking back, God was very patient with me with my ignorance. The things I did, the things I've said, the things I kept inside, just hiding myself. He was just very patient with me. And then I decided maybe, I don't know, life put something in front of me. I'll share with it in a second, but I guess I tried to mature, by until I started maturing, did I really understand that he's committed to me. There was always this, Jesus was over here. I saw him on Sunday. I heard stories about Jesus, but over here in life, he was not part of me. So I fast forward, and then my children are getting ready to leave me, right? Oh my goodness. I had such terrible empty nest, right? I started thinking about it when my son was entering high school. What am I going to do with myself? My life is wrapped around people pleasing my children, doing the things and putting love only to them. And then when they started leaving me, I'm like, wow, what am I going to do? And so I started taking piano lessons and working out and doing all these things that I thought would make me better. And they did. I was better. But empty nest came, and it really hit me hard. And then COVID came, boom. And then my second child left when COVID hit. So I got COVID, and my daughter, my nest was like, her bed was warm, and the change overnight just, I couldn't fix myself anymore. I didn't have any more tools in my tool belt, it was just pretty much empty. And I have to say, luckily, someone had been part of my life over those years, and I think recognized what was going on in me and never really left my side. And one day she said to me, Deb, Jeremiah 33:33. She said it to me multiple times. God says, call to me and I'll answer you. I'll tell you marvelous and wondrous things that you could never figure out on your own. Well, I was pretty miserable, but I'm thinking that sounds like a pretty cool thing. Marvelous and wonderful things, because that's what I could use about right now. And so, how many times have I heard that over my life, that all these Bible stories were here, but I was just so empty. I felt like it was all gone. I had no resource. It was just gone. But that introduction just kind of drew me back in, and I felt like I really didn't have any place else to go at that point. So I started digging in, and I started doing the things that I've learned here, that I sit here and learn on Sundays, and then I'm like, oh, a week went past. I didn't do any of those practices, So I started digging in, and I thought, well, why not? Why not try it? Just like the video here. Why not? And maybe it will be more. And I remember sitting in here for years listening to people's testimonies, thinking, envy, I was jealous. I was like, why do they have it? What is it that's missing? What am I not? I want that. I remember one, she did the video of going to the volcano in Guatemala, and I sat in the back thinking, oh, I could never do that. I've been on it 4 times now, right? So my journey's been small and baby steps along the way. I see that now. But at the time of this COVID, I was just lost and the stories weren't working. But I became an avid journaler. I finally learned to get my mind down on the paper. I started sorting through the lies that I had been telling myself over the years. I guess we could start with my first little sketch. I had spent a lot of time just listing all the problems and all the confrontation and all the situations in my life that had really just stuck with me, and I couldn't get them out of my mind. They just continually would haunt me and just come back, and I tell the same broken story again. I'm like, how do I let this go? I never knew what letting it go meant. So one of our D groups outings took me down to the Van Gogh display. And I was inspired by Van Gogh. I went out and bought a sketchbook, and my daughter and I got markers, and I started sketching. And I mean, during all this, I wasn't down and out. You guys came to church. Luckily, we were on COVID Zoom. You didn't see me when I was down and out, but I started sketching some of these feelings and these thoughts. And this is my first one. I just had a list of heartache, and I thought, well, where am I going to put this? Where am I going to put it? So I put it here, all my heartaches. When I found out that my heart was something I should have been protecting over the years, and I didn't really own it. I didn't own it. So I tied this to the fact that, it's my job to keep vigilant watch over my heart and not allow these things, to happen any further. And with God's help, I'm hoping if I have a heartache, I can just draw one little heart in the corner to this page, that I won't ever let it get to overflowing like this again. So I've read this little book. I don't know if you resonate with me today about hiding yourself at all. This book called Hind's Feet in High Places is a book about a woman who, her name is Much Afraid. And she walks around because she's just not right. She had stuff in her background like I've had. And it's a story of her gaining trust with God and her journey of how she did that. So at this point, I was with sorrow and sadness. They were my companions at the time as I worked through these things. But then on to the next slide. This is a sketch of the message. I don't know who reads the message here, but I read the message. And the message, I know that we used it in church a lot, but I have a collection of Bibles, right? I have all my father's Bibles. I have all my mother's Bibles. I have my grandmother's Bibles, but none of them reached me like this one. I couldn't believe it. And I was like, it changed me. And it's like all of a sudden the stories were brand new and fresh. And they just kind of, I don't know, something changed. And I was like, all of a sudden the stories were being spoken to me directly. I thought at this point, I latched onto the Bible verse of, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, she is a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come. So I can let those hearts go, and now I lean in the source. And that's my past. And a little bit of the present.
Yeah. So I know you've found several practices that really have kind of helped you, as you've said, all right, I'm following Jesus. How can I continue to see? How can I continue to follow? And so I think you were going to share a little bit about just some of those practices. That gets into it a bit, but
yeah,
you get some others as well.
Okay, so the first, with the next sketch, this sketch came from a journal that someone gave me like 10 years ago. The same person that told me about Jeremiah 33:3 gave me that sketchbook like 10 years ago. And I dug it out and started journaling in it. And she had written a pretty little message in the front of it. And that's where I went. I had to learn to sit still. I was on high test my whole entire life. I could not sit still. When I started meditating, 30 seconds. Oh, I'm thirsty. Oh, I got to write that down. Oh, I need to remember this. Oh. I couldn't sit still. I needed to learn to just be okay with my thoughts and know where to put them, and to start thinking of myself less and focusing on the greatness of him. And so the still acronym, I like acronyms, it helps me remember. So when I'm stressed, I'm like, okay, go be still. What does that mean? Oh, surrender. Surrender to him. It's okay to, that word to me has always spooked me too, surrender. But I get it now. I by studying, I understand I'm not giving anything up. I'm gaining by surrendering and resting in that. The T is to help me to think less of myself, to think highly of him. The I means to be intentional and to be in tune to what I'm hearing. The L means to let go of my ego, which gets in the way all the time, and to learn from what I'm hearing in the stillness. And the last is to love, listen to love, to know that I'm being loved in that moment. And then the second practice I lean on a lot is to try to trust in God. That's the next. It's a silly little sketch, but I was having a moment thinking of my mother who loves redbirds, and I was reflecting that day, and this was for her, but then it also helped me remember that the trust from God, and the story about how he'll care for all the birds. You know, every time I look at a bird now, I think, if he's taking care of that bird, he'll take care of me. You know, all the other things that I read in the Bible about, for example, Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Whoa, I was like, lean on not my understanding, you know, this is good. I like this. I don't need to know the answers. No wonder things are messed up, you know. So I lean on that a lot, that particular verse, because when I feel like I'm being mistreated, you know, when I'm mistreated, I'm like, I don't understand that. My heart didn't reflect that at all. Why are they thinking this? That's not what was going on. Or, you know, just being scared, or being, I don't know, confused. You know, many times I'm just confused, right? So this line of thinking really helps with that empty nest. When I realize that God really cares for all of us, even my children, more than I can love. And when I finally came to that realization, I have been able to free my mind of it, and not focus on my kids, not feel like I didn't do enough, not feel like I didn't teach them enough, not feel like I've done something. You know, I'm able to say, I did what I did. We did good. And I can let them go into their life and not worry about them. So, yeah, being connected has really helped me diminish a lot of my very destructive, anxious thinking and thoughts, by being able to sit still and know that there's this big picture out there. So, yeah, let's see if there's anything else. And the only other thing that the practice that I really focus on as well is what self shall I have? I sat in church for many years thinking, what are these fruits? I don't have all those. Why can't I have self-control? Why am I nasty sometimes? What's this all about? And I wanted those fruits, thinking I had to do something to get them. And I wanted to memorize them. So I wrote them down, and this is how I memorize things so I can really make it stick. But the self I want, is to be like Christ. The more I read, Peter tells us to do our best waiting, best living. I hadn't been doing that sometimes. And then, Paul writes in Romans 12, 1-2. Place your life before God. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. I want to be changed from the inside out. So over the years, my outside would get healthy, but my inside didn't feel right. And then my inside would feel right and my outside wasn't right. It was just never right. But just a few more applications. I focus on humility. I have a pretty clear understanding now that inferiority and superiority in relationships is destructive. To think that I know better than that person that's living their life, and by giving advice is really not serving, or judging that they're not doing it the way I would do it. So just learning to be humble. I've learned to love. I now know that love is not judging, advising, and blaming. It is listening. Listening. Wow, I can do that. Observing. How do I feel about this? How are they feeling? Where are they in this situation? How can I help in this situation? And valuing, V for valuing them and validating our emotions in the moment and letting them know that they're valued. And then E is empathizing with this person, empathizing with myself, loving myself. I do this with myself, empathizing and encouraging them to be the best they can be. So the little acronym sits in again, and I use that again for forgiveness. I didn't know how to forgive. You saw my hearts. I had no lessons in really what that meant. I knew up here, but not here. That the act of forgiveness, first acknowledging the hurt, many times I would just stuff it. Oh, it didn't bother me. And then I'd go home, did you hear that? List my grievances. And then realize I'm not the person to punish this person for doing bad. It's not my responsibility. Many times it's like, oh, what am I going to do next time I talk to them? Or how am I going to handle this next time? Or I am free of that. I pray for them. And I do that really to soften my heart. And then I try to stay open for a reconciliation. So, and the only other thing I can say to my practices is learning to find that voice inside, to hear that voice inside. I have the next one coming up. There we go. Some of these little pictures, they come from plates. This one I bought for my daughter because she loves rabbits. And I thought, oh man, that's the Holy Spirit just talking in that bunny's ear. And so I drew it one day because the same person that introduced me to Jeremiah 33:3 also led me to this concept of having just one audience. So that's where I am, present.
Yeah.
And then it's,
where are you heading in the future? I mean,
where am I going in the future?
Yeah.
This is my future. I just want to love people. I just want love. And I, of course, don't want conflict, but I realize it's part of making things work with people. But I want to let go of control. I want to let go of control for sure. And stop worrying about what other people think about me. To have the one audience, my future, I think his last name is Keller. He's a famous speaker. But I love when he talks about the future. He mentions Romans 8:28-30, the way he describes our future and what to expect. Bad things turn out for good. Good things can never be lost. And the best is yet to come. So I'm seeing in my life that bad things have turned out for good. I've gone back and studied those heartaches, and I've taken the lesson from them. I've found the lesson in my struggle. I see that good things have not been lost because I hang on to those. And the best is yet to come. Keeps me excited for the future. As far as community, I mean, I did most of my spiritual growth in this community. As far as feeling accepted, not judged, waiting for the shoe to drop, being excluded for some reason. I've worked through a lot of that stuff over the years here with you, with my friends in the group. So I totally embrace the value of that. I couldn't do it home in a vacuum, that's for sure. And I'm really hoping, I've seen these peaks and valleys in my life. I've had a few learning experiences in the past like this, but this one's different. This one's different. I need you all to help me stay on track. This is, you saw my owl. Okay, this one really got me one day. I was reading, and Jesus wrote this. You don't have to wait for the end. I'm right now, resurrection and life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. And everyone who, I can't read my writing, who lives, what's that word? Believing in me does not ultimately die at all. Do you believe this? And I had been asked this question multiple times over my life. I heard him asking me, and I just dodged the question, or I would just, tomorrow I'll think about it. But this time around, I realize the gifts that he's given us. I mean, his gift of life, giving his life, the reality of the story now that I've really focused my mind to wrap my brain around it all. Just the reality of our humanity and the story, the fact that it's been documented and it's there for me to have that I've been ignoring. So, yeah. So why do I follow Jesus? He's really good. He's really good. And he is love. He teaches us how to treat each other with respect and kindness, to move us forward and to not destroy. With him, I can replace fear with love.
we're going to just turn our attention to communion now. So I know the band's going to come up, and there's this story at the end of Luke's gospel where disciples are discouraged. They're walking along the road back to home at Emmaus, and somebody comes up alongside them. They don't recognize them at first, and it's not until they sit down and they're having a meal. And the text says that he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And that was this risen Jesus that had come alongside of them. So I think oftentimes it's at this table of communion that we maybe see most clearly the self-giving, radically forgiving, cross-shaped love of Jesus for us. And so as today you eat the bread and drink the cup, allow this to be an opportunity for us to have our eyes open, to see more clearly who Jesus is and who he is for us. You can go, and as always, there are candles at the back. You can say a prayer for Ukraine, and this corner back here under Grow and Journey, you can put a prayer in the little grids there, or pray with somebody also in the back. You may choose to give a financial gift at one of the boxes in the back, or stand and sing as the opportunity comes, or just sit and listen. But allow this to be a time when your eyes are opened to the Lord. Let's pray together. Jesus, as we receive the bread and the cup today, may we get another glimpse of your love for us. As we open our mouths to receive this food and drink, may we open our hearts as well. Amen. Let's receive communion together.